Can I just reiterate, I've actually split my talk into sections, so there will be kind of natural breaks if you do need to get up and go get a drink or whatever, that's absolutely fine. But at any point it's absolutely fine, where, you know, we want to make sure that you're comfortable being here and you're as comfortable as you can be in the environment with what we're discussing. Okay, so just to give you a bit of an idea of the shape of my first session. That computer noise? Computer says no. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a biography, a bit of an introduction about me, what's brought me here, and why I'm talking to you today. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about there, we've got it. I must have been pressing the wrong button, it'll be me. Diverse discipleship, so what that means, thinking about the broader context of you know, all of the different people who bring gifts to God's church and who are beloved. You are all beloved. I really hope that you know that, even if it doesn't feel like that sometimes. I really want you to know that today, and what that means. Inclusion and safeguarding, so obviously we are kind of tackling some of these challenging areas, but it is so important for anybody who's kind of following the Anglican Church at the minute, and there's been so much with regards to safeguarding. Next week is Synod, it will be all over Synod, so it's a really, really big topic, and it needs to be. Trauma-informed practice, so my background, before I became too ill to practice, I was a music therapist, steeped in safeguarding, boundaries, trauma-informed practice, so that's kind of one of the key areas that I bring to the conversation that we don't see a lot of. People come from safeguarding from reputation management, a lot of people come from safeguarding kind of having the basic training, but having a more in-depth understanding of trauma-informed practice and how a lot of what we do in church is triggering, can be triggering, that's important. Intersectionality, it's a bit of a big word, but all that means is that when we have disciplines, if you're thinking you have a theology discipline, and you might have a social sciences discipline, intersectionality is where we talk about the dovetails between and what they can actually contribute together. I'm big into co-production. This is an excellent example of a really successful co-production project. And I think we've got a lot to learn from looking at what each other has to offer as opposed to just sticking into our discipline. So just a little bit about that. And then this is all about coming from a place of crisis and trauma and moving forward. So my conclusion will be based around that. Does that all sound okay? Yeah, nobody's running out the door? Excellent. Okay. Right. Don't like to read at conferences, but I am today purely because it's early in the morning, I have long COVID, I will trip over words, I will get confused, so I've got my script, bear with me. Okay, so here we go. Firstly, I would like to make an apology. I was raised in a conservative Christian environment, and I used to think being gay was a sin. I am so sorry for the harm that I have caused in holding that view, and I know there will have been harm. I'm thankful for the excellent queer theologians and liberation theology which has enabled me to learn better. I'm grateful for the magnitude and the multitude of voices who are campaigning for change across faith institutions, not just the Christian church, but across faith institutions. I'm here today because I want to be the best ally I can be, and to support those in amplifying those with much more interesting things to say than I have. But I also am aware and want to use my privilege in being an accessible voice to those who have more of this journey to travel than I have. And I hope that my contribution today will be to this end. Okay. So, what changed for me? I met my one when I was 18 and at university. We married at 21, both had good professional careers. We had our first child at 24, and I thought I had achieved peak good Christian girl. Had another child at 27. Things were starting to slip by 28, falling apart by 29. Good Christian girls do not get divorced. I will not go into details, but it was a very, very dark time in my life, and everything I thought I knew about the world was completely shattered. So by 30, I was a single mother of 2 small children, on benefits, holding down a small part-time job, running activities in a care home. So my family was on Tyneside, and I was in Yorkshire. My life was starting anew, and this time I had the opportunity to choose my own direction. Following the good Christian girl roadmap, thank you, hadn't worked. So what now? That okay? Yeah, super. So I found myself almost adopted by a fellow school mum in the playground, and by extension was welcomed to her church. Now this raised a new issue for me. Should I join this church, I would be expected to remain single and celibate as a divorcee. Remarriage was frowned upon unless you were widowed. My divorce appeared to now be an unforgivable sin. Yet my freedom was so blessed and joyous, if challenging. I couldn't reconcile the two. Remember, I was only 30 years old. This was the frayed edge that unravelled everything and led to my eventual deconstruction of everything I had thought was absolute truth. So is sin an act or a state of being? If an act, my act of divorce was completed, and therefore I should have been forgiven through faith, therefore why not remarry? If a state of being, why was escaping an unhappy marriage to be my true self sinful? Why could a convicted murderer be rehabilitated and reclaim their salvation, yet if I remarried I would be ostracised? All of these thoughts whizzed around in my head with no clear answer. I was spurred on to seek the truth, the real truth. From the starting point of conservative evangelical teachings, I wandered into the Twitterverse, will always be Twitter, and found a world of incredible teaching. From Rachel Held Evans, Nadia Bolz-Weber, Richard Rohr. I read Undivided by Vici and cried, highly recommend it. Matt Nightingale, Kevin Garcia, Megan Pastor, the list goes on. And all of these people had so much more to teach me of God's unfailing love, expansive love of our full beings as God made us. A beautiful rainbow spectrum of life. I was shown a new way, and I just wanted to soak it all in. I began blogging, which ultimately cost me my church at the time. So I found Dave Lucas and became the driving force behind the Ordinary Office, developing from a disability-focused organisation to a space which embraced inclusion beyond just that remit. I discovered my own place on the autistic spectrum, and I became one of those who needed access requirements myself through my long COVID diagnosis. I have supported queer Christians to embrace their identities and find love. I've spent hours counselling those harmed by unsafe church practices. I have let love lead me to the places where I am needed, and I have become the voice I wish I had heard as a 16-year-old facing the world woefully unequipped. There is so much more I could tell you, but that's enough about me. Let's talk about why we're all here today. When he was about 9 years old, my son drew a picture of church. Dinosaurs worshipped alongside aliens, Pokemon are next to pirates, a spider raises his hand or his leg, while a fly buzzes past in peace. At the top he wrote, "All welcome." When I asked him about it, he said, "Everyone is welcome as long as they are nice and don't eat each other." Theology from the mouth of babes. Love it. So, I wonder if the pirate had a jetty by the church for their ship to dock. Did the dinosaur have the tallest part of the church building set aside for it so it didn't have to bang its head? Did the spider and the fly have an agreement that while the spider knew the fly was food and the fly knew the spider was prey, in church they both adhered to the standards that all are equal and left their regular dance with death at the door? When we talk about diversity in church, we have to recognise first and foremost, we are lacking. Our white, cis-het, abled male majority in leadership sends clear messaging. People like us are welcome. Others, maybe not so much. To change this messaging, we have a lot of work to do. For example, I am sitting here in my wheelchair talking to you now. When was the last time you saw someone in a wheelchair teaching in church? I never have. At my wedding to my wonderful current and last husband, our priest had knee issues and asked us if he could be seated for most of the ceremony. It was a complete non-issue for us, of course he could. Yet Anglican priest Katie Tupling talks about the difficulties that she had in one of her churches, where some of the congregation couldn't accept that she would be seated to share the host with them. Katie is an Anglican priest with cerebral palsy, and for her, sitting enabled her to perform her priestly role. Yet that was so challenging for some, they would rather have had an alternative abled priest available. All were not welcome in that space. How many churches have a quiet space like we have embedded in our programme today? In my experience, I can think of only one. Yet the room in question was so soundproof, not only did it keep the noise of the small children out of the main space, it kept the sounds of the main space out. I spent a wedding in that church feeling like a fish in a fishbowl, watching a friend's wedding like a silent movie. In many spaces like this, accessibility has been considered, but functional accessibility, not so much. Have you ever tried to guide a wheelchair up a ramp that is too narrow? You know, or too steep? Usually, while people are waiting for you to get on with it, it's scary. My local Accessible Homes team has a ratio that they use for ramped access when modifying homes, and only one of my local parish churches has access in line with this. It's okay, people say, we'll give you a shove. Well, firstly, I'm independent, and I want to be independent. And secondly, you cannot shove a powered wheelchair. It's heavy, it only moves the wheels when I direct it to, and you will just look like a prat trying. When spaces do the bare minimum to tick an access box without actively consulting someone with lived experience or investigating best practice guidelines, they're not making the space any more accessible than it was already. To be that person parked outside of a building, unable to get in, is soul-destroying. You feel worthless, unwanted, certainly not celebrated as a beloved member of a community, and certainly not enabled to use your gifts for the benefit of the wider community. I want to hear from my autistic siblings about their specific reading of Bible texts. I want to learn about queer interpretations of the gospel stories. to understand the Exodus story through a womanist lens. I have gained so much from Will Gaffney's Midrash, Jeff Chew's theology of compost, and my dear autistic friend's unyielding approach to witnessing in a church which does not understand him, but he stays. Why did I have to leave my church to be able to access and find these voices? For a time, I was part of the team who ran a women's event. My main responsibility was musical worship, but I was also integral to the planning. It is something, on the one hand, I am incredibly proud of, but also deeply troubled by. Why? Well, it brought me face to face with the issues of trans rights in faith spaces. What would we do if a trans woman walked through the door? So, same as any other woman, we would embrace and welcome and nurture. That's what we were there for. However, I was beginning to realise that view would not be shared across the team, let alone the whole organisation. In running a women's event, I needed to grapple with the risks presented to people within the group, and also those that we may invite to attend. I realised I was complicit in an organisation which discriminated against non-cis het women and would cause harm to any queer or trans people who would dip in for the evening. That was irreconcilable to me, and the event did fold. I tell you this because across faith organisations globally, there are individuals who know deep down they are all right, but others are not. It is those people we need to bring alongside us. It is those people we need to encourage to voice their concerns. Tell those in power, this is not acceptable. Those people that we need to tell our stories to assure them there is abundant life waiting if it all falls apart because they do the right thing. If a place is not safe for one group, it is not safe for any. Why do we say this? Well, in one church, a gentleman I know would move the bins from the side of the disabled toilet every time he walked in because he knew the space would be needed for a wheelchair to pull in and for a wheelchair user to transfer safely. Every single time they were put back because it was tidier, more convenient, where it had always been. This gentleman's knowledge of his wider community needs became an irritant. The leadership of the church didn't know what to do with him. What they should have done was to support him, listen to his reasoning, and tell those putting the bins back to stop it. What they did was ignore it. They ignored the needs of this individual to serve his community. They ignored the needs of the wheelchair users within that community, or those who possibly might attend. They ignored the importance of welcome, where wheelchair users would know straight away, by that toilet, if the toilet ain't suitable, the church ain't gonna be. Welcome, incidentally, is so much more than a smile and a handshake as you walk through the door. If we want to hear more wheelchair users speaking and sharing their gifts, we need to have ramps up to stages so that they can get on it. If we want more people with chronic fatigue to share in our communities, we need to do church later in the morning than 8:30, 9 o'clock. And consider if a 45-minute sermon is really necessary. Spoiler alert, it really isn't. Have large print resources for visually impaired people and guides to audio describe the sermon to them as it progresses, the service rather. Be imaginative about what people may need, or dare I say it, ask them. I no longer attend church community for many reasons, but a key one for me is inclusion. A church which is not inclusive is not safe. The risk for harm to individuals is greater, and for communities as the myths of abled heterocentric salvation are perpetuated. I forgot I was speaking in the morning when I wrote that down. I want to see churches with ramps, hearing loops, sign language translators, large print, dementia-friendly decor, sensory areas, fiddle bags, short sermons with spaces for discussion if you would like, a range of theological views represented, and nobody eating each other. Although maybe drawing his mother with blah 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 coming out of my mouth was a little bit hard. Are we all okay? Yeah, good. So, inclusion and safeguarding. What qualifies me to speak on these issues? Well, I've worked my entire career in special schools, SEN schools, care homes, and with vulnerable people in the community. First as a teacher and then as a music therapist. Reflective practice and adherence to codes of conduct have always been essential in my work. As an overthinking perfectionist, I had to find a balance very quickly between what was possible, preferable, and positive for my clients and my own mental health. I have studied legislation and policies to ensure my practice is on the right side of the line, when I often worked in unusual scenarios through my passion for reaching the most isolated in the community. So I have worked, for example, in the bedrooms of private houses with clients and had to carefully risk assess those situations to make it safe both for the client and for myself. There is a fine line between what is acceptable practice and what is not. The arbiter of that line is the reflective practitioner. So what happens when a practitioner is not reflective? You need only look at the debacle within the Church of England at the moment around safeguarding, which I will leave for later speakers to discuss in more detail than I have. However, I will say this. When people gain positions of power and have no transparent code of conduct, no means of supervision or reflection, and no training to embed a reflective approach, that is a safeguarding risk in and of itself. Safeguarding matters. As a community, we only function if we care for each other, especially those deemed the most vulnerable. But we also have to recognise we are all vulnerable at times. When working in mental health services with a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, I could have been a client, yet I was the facilitator of wellbeing services. It was actually my greatest strength within that role, but also my greatest weakness. I had to constantly, dynamically risk assess as I worked, ensuring my own stuff was noted but filed away until the appropriate time to address it, which was not in front of the client. I see people in positions of power all the time, pretending to be okay when they're really not. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has been open about his own diagnosis of depression and the medication that he takes to support his mental well-being, and good on him. What the Church of England has gone through in recent years around living in love and faith would test anyone to their limits, and has. What I don't see is enough evidence of reflection, ownership of wrongdoing, or adapting approaches in response to dynamic risk assessment. As the Wilkinson report clearly highlights, risk assessment in the Church of England is about reputational risk, not about risk of harm to the individuals that we are supposed to be serving in love. I don't know about you, but if I stop and look at the hideous mess the Church of England has got itself into, I could just crumble. And I don't even identify as Anglican. This conference is about love leading us forward, yet how do we move forward from here? While the theological position of individuals are held in greater regard than international human rights, we have a huge problem. It is worth noting that in 1994, the Toonan versus Australia case became the springboard for much debate within the international community around same-sex relationships, with the 2008 declaration to the UN General Assembly clearly condemning all forms of violence and discrimination against the LGBTQ+ community, which, and I quote, undermine personal integrity and dignity. How is it dignified to have the legitimacy of same-sex relationships used as a political debating tool within the General Synod chamber? Another key phrase is the condemnation of economic, social and cultural rights. Surely, for queer Christians who believe in the sacrament of marriage, depriving them of their right to access such marriage within their home church communities is directly against this declaration. 96 countries around the world have signalled their agreement with this declaration, including the United Kingdom. Yet the state church, the Church of England, directly contradicts it. I know of many affirming clergy and churches who are just getting on with loving people in their parishes, and for whom the national issues going on are mere noise in the background. I have some sympathy with that approach in a space where holding tensions is key. However, I firmly believe we have to have both. Grassroots change driven by the love of the person before us, and also institutional change enabling inclusion to become the standard, not an unachievable idea. We don't just want to be included, we want to be embedded, equitable, a complete non-issue for diverse populations to meet together with all their needs met and personhood valued. Okay, trauma-informed practice. We cannot talk about inclusion and safeguarding without taking a moment to pause and understand the trauma caused by spiritual abuse in faith organisations. So I count myself as a survivor of spiritual abuse, and the trauma it caused definitely informs my work on safe faith spaces. If you are here with experience of spiritual abuse, I am truly sorry for your experience, and may I encourage you to speak to one of our wonderful chaplains who are here today should you need to. The recent Wilkinson report was groundbreaking, and that it highlighted the need for trauma-informed approach within safeguarding in the Church of England. I could not have been happier when I read those words in black and white, very close to the beginning of the report. We ask a lot of our churches, I know we do, and of those who minister to us. It's hard. But trauma-informed approach is much, much more than just the latest buzzword, the latest corporate thing. It is a way of being with other people, most of whom will have some form of traumatic life event in their history. It is a way of being which heightens awareness of the possibilities behind people's actions, gives us tools to respond, and also enables us to know when we are not the right person to deal with this particular situation. One of the best things a former priest ever did for me in a crisis I experienced was to pick up the phone to a colleague and send me to see her. He knew he wasn't equipped with what was in front of him, but he had built a network which meant that he had the support of someone who was. Both priests held me together in one of the hardest weekends of my life, and they did so through a trauma-informed approach. If that priest hadn't understood the impact of his personal response, combined with his own limitations, my experience would have been worsened. The risks included pressure to take a course of action I was uncomfortable with, inadvertent exacerbation of the trauma, and re-abuse in weeks to follow through continued discussion of the situation and how to deal with it. I'm thankful to him for the way he supported me, which ultimately led to a positive journey towards healing. There is significant research underway about the impact of spiritual abuse in faith organisations. I've taken part in a number of studies myself, and I'm aware of multiple projects under the guidance of people like Professor Lisa Oakley, and Dr. Katie Cross. There are also grassroots projects putting pressure on institutions for change, such as currently the Sheepfold Project and SCM's Honest Church. The current tensions around safeguarding in faith spaces cannot continue. Change will come. So I was watching the incredible Ted Lasso recently. Don't know if you've seen it. It's not about football. It's brilliant. I was struck by a scene where Ted shares a quote originally from the American poet Walt Whitman. Be curious, not judgmental. He goes on in the scene to demonstrate how, in being judgmental, the rich playboy character had made a wager on the assumption Ted wouldn't understand darts. As Ted plays a chain of 2 double 20s and a bullseye, he explains curiosity would have led to the conversation around darts, where Ted would have explained that he had played darts every weekend with his father for 6 years and was actually darn good at it. We all make judgments in life. I have carefully judged my choice of outfit today to look professional but approachable. You have judged us trustworthy in attending this conference today, for which we thank you. Judgment in and of itself, like so much in life, is not inherently bad. However, when it is used for harmful ends, we need to challenge this. So many of us are judged because of how we present. Myths such as bisexuality equals promiscuity fuels judgments, which can be then seen embedded in policy, such as the highly archaic issues in human sexuality, which the House of Bishops declared in 1991 and is still their official position today. It is important to recognise that even within communities focused on liberation, there can be the misuse of judgment. Within the disability community, for example, racism is an uncomfortable truth, as highlighted by autistic black pastor Dr. Lamar Hardwick in his book, How Ableism Fuels Racism. In our own work with the Ordinary Office, we are only too aware of how white-centric we are and actively seek to change this. Womanism is a specific and fascinating area adjacent to feminism, but which focuses on the experiences of women of colour. There are specific issues within some black communities who focus on liberation theologies, but hold a conservative approach towards LGBTQ+ issues. Even as we fight for change for ourselves, we can still be complicit in keeping the ladder up behind us, which others need to ascend. My remit here is disability. So why do I keep wandering into queer theology? Apart from the fact that it's an LGBTQ-focused conference. Well, simply put, the fix for my marginalisation as a disabled person is the same fix for the marginalisation of my LGBTQ+ siblings, my siblings of colour, my siblings of older age, my siblings of other faiths. Name the privilege, be humble in stepping aside, and elevate the needs of those on the margins. All will benefit. A quiet space for autistic people may benefit the worn-out mum with long COVID who values the space to rest. A dementia-friendly approach might help the person with learning difficulties who has never been diagnosed but knows things are a bit harder for them than they should be. I read among lots of books which really struck me. I read 2 books last year which really struck me, despite having different themes, one of them being At the Gates, Disability Inclusion and the Churches, and the other a book called Queer Holiness. Completely different topics, but the core messaging was almost identical. We are equal, imagine us as such, and let us in. Indeed, Naomi Lawson-Jacobs and Emily Richardson spoke about their book At the Gates at Greenbelt Festival last year, and arrived to do so at a stage with no ramped access. The irony was not lost on those of us observing the situation from our mobility scooters, as they had to go and find a ramp. Each group has their own unique challenges, for sure. But I truly believe we should be working together as well to push the point that enough is enough. Okay, so how can we let love lead us towards that goal? Home stretch. I am many things. I am beloved, I'm tired, I'm valuable, I am a wife, I am a Geordie, in case you haven't noticed, I am frazzled, I am disabled. I left binaries behind a long time ago, or at least I tried to, yet binaries and labels are all around us. Am I disabled because I have long COVID, or because the world is organised around a 24-hour culture and the walking population? Am I excluded because, well, you know, making alterations to listed buildings is almost impossible? Or because my very existence as a disabled Christian in a position of ministry challenges the way that the Bible presents disability? I throw many questions out there into the ether, deliberately without answers. I don't actually like answers on the whole. I like reasons, perspectives, musings, but clear-cut answers, not so much. Answers imply definites. This is the only way, the right way. Yet who are we to decide that? So I may design a book cover and know that it's really good. It reflects the messaging and clearly displays all the information that I intended to. A recipient might know that the book cover is not very good, the messaging is really mixed, and there is information missing that they expected. So which is the correct answer to the question, is that book cover ready to print? The issue around definitive answers is a core part of the problem when it comes to disability, diversity and inclusion. Once a church or any organisation believes there is only one answer and acts accordingly, there is inherent risk. Take Church A. They display huge all are welcome banners across the outside and inside lobby doors. They have a team of welcomers who are well versed at engaging newcomers in a non-intrusive way. They have notice sheets which include information about what to expect at the service, all also available on their website. Sounds great. What about Church B, which has no decor as they meet in a cafe? They have one person who welcomes visitors and invites them to join, but once you're settled, they then have other responsibilities to fulfill. Almost everyone in the room has a role to play to make it work, and you are invited to read a line of Lectio Divina, but only if you wish to. You can give a nod and be passed over if you're not comfortable. Which gives the impression of a safer church, I wonder? If you thought Church A, you'd probably be among the majority. However, my alarm bells would be ringing. How about when you've completed their minimum requirement of 6 months in the congregation before meeting the vicar to discuss serving on a team, which everybody does? Sounds okay? How about when that vicar politely tells you he doesn't believe in sex outside of marriage, therefore your 20-year-long same-sex relationship disqualifies you from joining a team in case you become a stumbling block to others living the way Jesus taught us? But you can still make the coffee. Performative inclusion masks the true discrimination that takes places in churches up and down the country every time church doors are open. Look at their notice board. Are there any references to organisations like Inclusive Church or Open Table? Are there any female or non-binary faces on the welcome board? Is the congregation coming into the church diverse? Or mainly older, white, well-dressed baby boomers? Yay for baby boomers, by the way. I love baby boomers. They have so much power as agents of change, and we need to celebrate them for who they are, just as we do every demographic. So I'm not picking on baby boomers. I want to learn from my disabled siblings. I know a lot about what I know, but there is so much more that I don't know. I can't possibly understand what it is like for a blind person to access church. I need to learn that from them before I can then be their ally. Disabled people are no more one homogenous group than people of colour are. I want to learn from Punjabi Christians, African Christians. I loved learning the piece in Urdu in one multicultural church I attended. I want to learn from Buddhists, from humanists, and my local Sikh chemist. We have such amazing conversations. I want my faith to be challenged, and I want to learn better. I am glad I am not the person I was 10 years ago, who struggled to support same-sex adopted parents, or who would have cared if my child was gay. I am genuinely sorry for the person that I was and the harm I caused, and I will keep saying that because it's so important for people to hear. So now I love. I run everything through the filter of love. Yes, of course, I understand conservative interpretations of the Bible, which it's not clear on anything, by the way. However, while I know there are alternative theological interpretations which allow for more loving actions, which relate more to the God who loves lavishly, then that is what I will do. I'd rather need forgiveness for loving too much than not loving enough, although I am personally convinced you can't love too much in this life. I'm also well aware of my limitations. I speak about inclusion, knowing that if we had the capacity at the ordinary office, we would still do more. I make mistakes, I know I do. I've scoured this talk for mistakes, for missteps, for things that could be worded differently. I am certain there will still be some. I've had safeguarding issues to address in my ministry. We've made mistakes. Any organisation who says they haven't, I'm afraid they're not being honest with you, or with themselves. However, we are confident through our reflection and holding each other accountable that we're doing the best that we can in the service of our community, and that is the key thing that I ask for. You may not have an accessible building, and you may not have the funds to do anything about it. But do an accessibility audit and make a plan. Then follow it, review it regularly, listen to diverse input. That way, you are living the journey. You may not understand the alternative viewpoint being presented to you about trans bodies reflecting the co-creation of person and God in relationship, but you can honour that view. Once I had unlearned my prejudices, chosen the theological positions which served me now, unlearned the ones that I had been brought up with that no longer did, and accepted that the liminal space of uncertainty was okay, the world opened up for me. Medieval mysticism, modern-day prophets, historical exploration of where our beliefs actually come from. Spoiler alert, not a lot of them are actually from the Bible. This has all been enriching and has informed my work. I have a thirst for learning, following years of being told what to think. And I firmly believe that God is the judge, not me. I don't have all the answers. I have to be very careful and mindful of what I say and how I say it, especially on social media. I want to ensure my contributions are loving and graceful, where the conversation is so often fraught and sometimes even abusive. Sometimes I just want to log off the computer and never log back on again. But I firmly believe presence is an act of resistance. I don't feel safe in church spaces, but I can be safe online with a community I know, a set of my own guidelines to protect myself, and the support of my close and trusted colleague Dave. From this place, I know I can make a positive difference, however small. If we all made such small positive differences, the world would still be a much better place. Thank you for listening.